All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to take just a second to let additional folks filter into the Zoom webinar. But want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today for WASAC Spring Program and Policy Showcase. My name is Joel Anderson. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm our Assistant Director of External Affairs here at WASAC. We're really excited for all of you joining us today to learn a little bit more about some of the programs and areas of policy development that WASAC is working on both continuously as well during the 2024 interim. So with that being said, we are going to get into it. Please feel free to introduce yourself using our chat feature, but we will go over some Zoom housekeeping rules in just a second. So next slide, please. Great. So as I mentioned, and as you just heard, this webinar is being recorded today, and it'll be posted on WASAC's website as well as sent out to attendees and other folks following the end of the webinar. We will not be using the raised hand feature today to answer questions. So please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions during the webinar. You're welcome to submit questions anonymously or with your name attached. And then you can also upvote questions if you're interested. And then lastly, as I mentioned, please feel free to use the chat for other comments like introducing yourself and your organization to our other attendees. We're really excited that you're here and again to talk about some of the really cool initiatives that WASAC is working on right now. Next slide, please. So just to go into our agenda a little bit today, we are going to be spending about 5 minutes giving background about WASAC for anyone who is not familiar with our agency's work. And then we'll be spending about 15 minutes each talking about 3 bodies of work. So first, OtterBot, which is a texting chatbot for high school students and their families. Washington Health Corps, a statewide loan repayment program for healthcare professionals. And then lastly, our growing body of work and policy development around student basic needs security. Each of these presentations will last around 10 to 15 minutes, followed by 5 minutes reserved for Q&A. And then following the end of those presentations, we will reserve a little bit more time to revisit other questions that have been asked of our presenters, and then finish off with a closing activity and again, continue to field your questions. For any comments or other issues we do not get to on this webinar, we will have a record of all the questions submitted and everything mentioned in the chat. So I know myself, as well as others on our team, will be following up with folks if needed. But again, thanks for joining us, and we'll go to the next slide. So a little bit more about the Washington Student Achievement Council. We are really guided by our overarching council that supervises and helps direct the work of our agency. You'll see here, we have a number of council members who represent various sectors within higher education, including the public four-year institutions, the public community and technical college system, private four-year institutions. And then we also have the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reichdahl, representing K-12 education. And outside of those folks, we have a number of council members who are appointed by the governor and are citizen members who work in and around higher education, K-12 education, workforce development, and other areas. This also includes 2 student members. We currently have a graduate student and our undergraduate student role is vacant. So if you know anyone who could be interested in your network, please feel free to let us know. But again, this group collectively meets quarterly and directs a lot of the work that we do as a state agency. Next slide. And this work directs itself toward achieving Washington's post-secondary attainment goal. So here I'd like to note, currently we are aiming to have at least 70% of the adults in Washington state between the ages of 25 and 44 across racial and ethnic communities and regions will earn a post-secondary credential, so a degree or certificate or other form of credential after high school. Right now, we estimate that roughly 62% of adults within this category in Washington state have earned a credential after high school. And so this is a goal, that we're still pursuing. And in doing so, we are fulfilling our statutory role as a state agency by aiming to improve educational attainment in Washington, not only through the facilitation of things like state financial aid plans and college savings plans, but also through policy and knowledge development, community outreach, external affairs, and other work on behalf of WASAC. Next slide. And all of that work, as I just shared, leads into something called our strategic action plan. This is updated every year. And again, following the presentation, you will have access to these slides to learn a little bit more about our work. But our core statement is centered in equity, and we believe that if we can build an affordable and supportive educational environment for students in our state, more Washington residents will enroll in and complete the Credential of Bearing program. So, like I said, you'll hear a little bit more later today about our student supports area of focus, or our policy cluster as it's called. But we also have bodies of work continuing to grow and be developed around enrollment policy, affordability policy, and completion policy. And altogether, we believe that these clusters allow us to center equity in all of our work and allow more students, again, to pursue a credential or degree after high school. Next slide. Lastly, before we turn it over to our presenters this afternoon, we wanted to just give a snapshot of the policy development and stakeholder engagement cycle that WASAC focuses on throughout the year. So you may have noticed this spring webinar is actually the first time we have hosted this event to share more about some of WASAC's programs. And we are really taking on some intentional efforts to improve our engagement with stakeholders, to engage with folks just more regularly throughout the year. We know that policy development does not happen in a vacuum or during a set of weeks or months during the year. It is a 24/7, 365 days a year activity, and we are so grateful to engage in that work with you all. This month, of course, we're hosting our webinar today. We'll share some information at the end of this presentation that next month in July, we will be hosting our annual stakeholder engagement sessions on Zoom, and just how the rest of our process goes as a state agency, and specifically an agency within Governor Inslee's executive cabinet. Our Washington Student Achievement Council has to approve our policy and budget requests in August before they are submitted to the governor's office in September. And then we find out the outcomes of those policies in December when the governor's staff releases his budget. We are planning to host our next webinar again toward the end of this calendar year to preview the governor's budget, talk about which of our proposals as an agency were included or not included, and what that means for us going into the 2025 legislative session. But again, our hope today is that discussing WASAC programs and policies will open the door to you all and to all of our presenters here to questions, to additional conversations about policy proposals, and other ways about how Washington can improve post-secondary attainment across the state. That work does not always have to be through a bill or a budget proviso, but we have a lot of other exciting initiatives that we're looking forward to sharing more about today. So with that, if we could transition to the next slide, we're going to enter our first presentation about OtterBot. And so presenters, please feel free to introduce yourself as we get started, but I'm going to turn it over first to our Director of College Access Initiatives at WASAC, Sarah Weiss, to get us started. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Joel. As Joel mentioned, my name is Sarah Weiss. Weiss is nice. You can remember our conversation that way. I serve as the Director of College Access Initiatives, and I'm joined with my colleague Casey from MDRC. Casey, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Casey Eichmeyer, and I'm a research associate at MDRC.
Great, thanks, Casey. And we're going to be presenting together this afternoon. So glad that you're all with us this afternoon. We're excited to be able to share and engage with you about the work we're doing with OtterBot to communicate with students and families, as well as about learning to improve the tool and build upon the last few years of work. Next slide, please. So meet OtterBot. We're going to do a quick overview of what this thing called OtterBot actually is. We'll run through how it works. Casey will talk about the outcomes and impact from our research and optimization work that's been funded by a Capital One Foundation grant. Then we'll briefly share where we're headed with OtterBot. So that's the plan for the next 15 minutes or so, and look forward to conversing with folks. So what is OtterBot? First and foremost, OtterBot is free for students and families. We don't charge for this resource. Designed for Washington high school students and their parents or guardians. Students and then their parents and guardians who are enrolled in the College Bound Scholarship Program and have a phone number on file with WASAC are automatically signed up for OtterBot. Don't worry, they're given instructions with the first message they receive on how to opt out if they want to. But the vast majority of our students and parents and guardians remain opted in to the texting platform. Other students and parents and guardians can opt in to receive text messages if they like. OtterBot uses an AI-enabled technology to connect a user's question to a vast and deep knowledge base or set of answers no matter how they ask the question. So that's what the AI is doing. It's connecting them, their question, no matter how they ask it, to the proper response. This is the really exciting and scalable part of the tool. The knowledge base is customized to Washington information, as well as pulls from our vendors, platform and information on more general college-going content. Thus, because it does utilize that AI technology to connect students and families to their question and their answer based on their question, it is available 24/7 for users to text in their questions and get a response. If they can't quite get what they're looking for or need additional help, it can be escalated to a WASAC staff member as well. This is an example to give you an idea of the scale currently of OtterBot. We're connecting with about 35,000 college-bound senior students and their parents, so very exciting. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of timeline with OtterBot, we launched in November of 2019 with legislative funding to support college-bound seniors. That's where we started. We expanded to support in 2020 juniors and seniors who are enrolled in the College Bound Scholarship Program with a phone number on file, which is about roughly half of the class, so about 15,000 or so students per grade at that point. We received Capital One Foundation funding through a grant to better understand the bot, as well as to expand to parents in 2022 and then in 23. Finally, with that grant, we were also able to initiate texting to 9th and 10th grade college-bound students, as well as their parents and guardians. In addition to all the work that Casey and the MDRC and WASAC team have been doing around studying the bot to be able to optimize and improve it. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there is a deep knowledge base or brain that OtterBot has that has been customized with by WASAC staff. But here's some examples of content that we can connect with students about. I'll talk more in a moment on just how we do that, but we focus, primarily on financial aid process and applications and programs. But we know that from students, whether it's been a focus group or a survey or in our responses from them, is that they're interested in other topics, not just financial aid. Kind of the why and the how of accessing post-secondary education is really important. So we share information around admissions, general college going process and information. We define college here really broadly, as Joel mentioned, that credential bearing program, when also other kind of more general tips and reminders. And I do just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to the many partners who I've seen many of their names pop up here, or their organizations who've provided us information or links to be able to share out with students, especially around deadline changes with the issues with the FAFSA. We really appreciate that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, how does OtterBot support students and families? Comes in three main ways. First, we send proactive messages to users. It depends on if they're a senior, junior, or a parent, what exactly that message is, but it goes out to them. Secondly, the knowledge base, as I mentioned, will send that information back out to students based on what their question is, using that AI feature to connect them to the right answer. That knowledge base, as I mentioned, is maintained and written by WASAC staff with support from our vendor. Finally, and this is relatively new to us, something we're looking to continue to move on and expand with, is what's called hashtag commands. And this is where users can type in a specific hashtag, and I'm told, depending on your age, it's either hashtag or pound. I used to call it pound, but then realized the students don't know what I'm talking about. So hashtag command is to provide a more streamlined experience for the user. So for example, if they're interested in learning more about scholarships, they can do hashtag scholarship bot, and it'll connect them to a variety of resources about applying for scholarships versus them having to type in a question. So that's kind of a new feature that we're looking at building on in the next year as well. And now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Casey from MDRC to discuss some of our research with OtterBot.
Thanks, Sarah. So briefly, our partnership with WASAC is a multi-phase research project designed to strengthen the OtterBot and increase the likelihood that it significantly improves the rates of financial aid receipt and also post-secondary enrollment among students from families with low incomes. So during phase 1, which was our discovery phase, we examined student usage of and engagement with the OtterBot. We explored student needs, reactions to OtterBot, and also the perceived barriers that students have to college through focus groups and surveys, and also determine the next steps to take to optimize the OtterBot in phase 2 so that it can be more effective in helping students receive financial aid and access education and training opportunities after high school. So next slide, please. In phase 2, which is our current phase, we took our learnings from this first discovery phase and used them to inform our testing phase. So our behavioral science team at MDRC redesigned the text messages using behavioral science principles and also in response to what we heard from students in phase 1. So this meant we sent out fewer text messages, we changed the tone to be more professional and to increase trust, and also this included redesigning the messages to incorporate what Sarah called the pound key or the hashtag command menu that would provide students with options for quick responses. Next slide. Oh, sorry, go back, I'm sorry. So during this phase, we conducted and are continuing to conduct what is called A/B testing. And A/B testing is a method that's used to compare two versions of an intervention in order to determine which version of that intervention, so here the OtterBot text messages, is the most effective. The target population, and for us, these are students who were slated to receive OtterBot's senior messaging, is randomly divided into two groups, Group A, which is the control group, and Group B, which is the treatment group. So Group A receives the standard kind of business as usual intervention. So these messages that they received are very similar to the messages that were sent out during phase 1. And then Group B receives the new and optimized intervention. So this would be the behaviorally informed messages. And then we collect data on these specific outcome metrics across the lifetime of the intervention. Next slide, please. Our A/B testing is guided by a theoretical pathway that goes from OtterBot to financial aid receipt and enrollment that considers the many steps that can occur between a student receiving this optimized message and then taking financial aid or enrollment actions. So the left side of the graphic represents what we understand to be engagement. Next slide, please. This includes receiving the message, students reading the message, choosing to respond or choosing to opt out, or even taking no action. Next slide, please. Several of these measures of engagement are unmeasurable. So if students read and understand the message, we're not able to measure that. Next slide, please. But we do have the opportunity to measure whether a student receives the message and does nothing, whether they respond or decide to opt out and no longer receive text messages from OtterBot. Our theoretical pathway suggests that by staying enrolled in OtterBot and receiving this wealth of information will lead to improved financial aid and enrollment outcomes. And it's important to examine those actions too, though, that may be a proxy for disengagement, like opting out. Next slide, please. So given that we're examining what can be observed, we partition our engagement measures into 3 buckets. So we examine whether students responded at least once and did not opt out, and whether they opted out at least once. So if our intervention, and here this would be the redesigned text messages, are effective, we should see that students in the treatment group who receive these messages are responding at higher rates and not opting out. And so what we do find is our early and preliminary results do suggest that this could be the case. Next slide. We also fielded a survey in the fall to gauge OtterBot students' understanding of the College Bound Scholarship and what it provides. And our results suggest that there is still a significant portion of students who are CBS eligible who would benefit from knowing more about what College Bound provides, although half of all of these survey respondents in both groups do have an understanding of what College Bound can provide. So although we've gained promising preliminary insights on OtterBot in phase 2, we're really looking forward to the next steps that we're taking in further optimizing the bot, which Sarah will highlight in the following slides.
Thanks, Casey. As you said, we're just so excited to kind of build on the learning over the last 2 years with OtterBot. This year, Wasac received $400,000 in one-time legislative funding to expand to reach more students and families, to build on that work over the next year that we've learned from the first phases of the Capital One Foundation grant. This funding is critical as there's also a data sharing bill that was passed this year that will enable contact information sharing between OSPI and WASAC to support students and families with this work. So opening it up to more and more students. Without this funding, we would not be able to support the 9th and 10th grade college-bound student or parents only going back to that 11th and 12th grade group of students that we started with. The program would shrink and our ability to make change, would be diminished through that. So we're just so excited and appreciative of that funding and really hope to continue building on it with the work we're doing with MDRC and the bot optimization. Next slide, please. The partnership, what we heard from students and families was that there's so much information that goes out to them that they also want to receive it, but they also want their parents and their families to receive it as well. So hearing from a trusted messenger also matters for students and families is what we heard. So not just hearing it from WASAC or not just hearing it from OtterBot, but hearing about OtterBot from a trusted source, someone that is known and relevant to them. So we're planning to work this upcoming year with that additional funding. As part of that additional funding is with select partners, either school district or regionally based CBO, community-based organization, to test the impacts of what we're calling kind of regionalizing the bot. So, customizing it, providing local information, local resources, things like that. This will give us deeper insight into what works with students and how best to support them, building off of the information that we learned in phase 1 and 2 of the grant. So thank you so much for the time and opportunity to share about OtterBot. I'm going to turn it back over to Joel.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Sarah and Casey again for talking more about OtterBot. I know we have one question in the Q&A so far. I want to invite our attendees to continue submitting questions if they have them. We'll answer just one or two now and then move along and answer more at the end if needed. First, Sarah, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier that any high school student, or I guess a junior and senior in College Bound can be auto-enrolled in OtterBot and that other students can participate, but they have to opt in on their own. Could you talk a little bit more about kind of why that's the case and how we might be able to get to a point where more students are able to auto-enroll in OtterBot?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joel, for the question. That's a really good one. And so, WASAC as a state grant agency, administers the College Bound Scholarship Program. Part of that administration comes communicating with those students. And so we about College Bound with the colleges about the students that they're enrolled. And so we have contact information working with partner school districts and schools to get that contact info. We have that contact information for a large chunk of those college-bound students already because of our role supporting and administering the College-Bound Scholarship Program. The data bill that I mentioned, Senate Bill 6053 from this past legislative session, could be an avenue in the future to getting the contact information for, like, let's say all seniors in the senior class, but it would also require additional funding to support licenses for those students to receive texts.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. There are two other questions in the chat, which I think we'll be able to touch on. The first is that can OtterBot send questions, or excuse me, send prompts and texts in multiple languages?
Yeah, fantastic question, because I meant to mention that. So thank you for the question. It absolutely can. There is a process for changing the text message into a different language that we will frequently communicate out with students as a reminder on how to change the language. It can support language up to 100 different languages in the bot. And so we certainly want to support students and families where they're at in terms of needing that support in a variety of languages.
Okay, awesome. That is really great to know. I think our other question we'll take for right now before transitioning to the next topic is that does OtterBot provide information on vocational schools and training?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So thank you. We absolutely provide, when I say college going, we really define college broadly. It includes vocational technical school information, 2-year, 4-year, so that the whole swath of opportunities and options that students in Washington State have. So we absolutely provide text messages about that. We share graphics from our college and career knowledge workbook that was recently created in a partnership with multiple organizations as well. So absolutely including information about a variety of educational opportunities.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. For our attendees, I will share as well. I see a question about potentially distributing this OtterBot flyer. We are planning to send out some follow-up information following the webinar, including a recording, as well as some quick links to the topics discussed today and any other informational materials. So we will make sure to include flyers if they're available to us so that you can promote these programs to your colleagues and your networks. And we would really appreciate that. So again, Sarah and Casey, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Great. We are going to transition, if we could go to the next slide, to our second topic today, which is the Washington Health Corps. And I'm going to invite Luis Zepeda Chavez, our program manager, to talk more about this. Just want to make sure that folks can see a screen. We're all spotlighted and good to go. So Luis, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to you to get started.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luis Cepeda Chavez. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the program manager for the health programs here at WASAC. I'm also today joined by Sarah Al-Kurdi, our assistant director, who will be supporting with Q&A where possible. And yeah, let's go into the next slide. We'll talk about our programs. Yeah, so just a quick overview of the Washington Health Corps. It was first established in 1989 to address healthcare workforce shortages. Our programs at the moment are primarily student loan repayment programs for healthcare professionals. The Health Corps, that, as we know it today, was established in 2019, and that included the expansion of our state health program to include a behavioral health program specific for supporting the behavioral health workforce. We also have a federal student loan repayment program, which is now also known as the FHP, or Federal Health Program. In our program, we collaborate closely with the Department of Health in determining shortage areas and areas, to prioritize, and also in collaboration with our planning committee, which consists of several stakeholders across the state to help us determine decision making when it comes to administrating our programs and establishing priorities for healthcare professions that are in shortage. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about our federal health program first. This award uses federal funds, matched with state dollars. Our maximum award is $70,000 for the length of the contract. This is a 2-year contract, which differs from our state programs that I'll cover in a bit. And it allows a participant who works 40 hours per week to receive up to $70K in student loan relief. This program is a little bit more strict than our state programs. It allows 35.7 days off, give or take. But we do have a deferment process that allows some flexibility because we understand that sometimes life happens, and that allows up to a year for folks to put their contract with us on pause if they need so. And we work really closely with our participants to make sure that, that they're able to fulfill their obligation and get that relief that they need. Next slide, please. And so our state awards, the SHP and BHP, the state health program, and the behavioral health program operate similarly. These are state funds only, and the maximum award is up to $75,000 in student loan relief. This is a 3-year contract if working at full time, so a little bit longer than that full-time federal program, or up to 5 years if working the minimum of 24 hours per week, although most folks finish before 5 years. We have a little bit more leeway in the amount of time that folks can take off from work during a given program year. But likewise, the deferment process works here similarly, and folks have that flexibility if needed. And we also work really closely with our state participants to ensure that they are able to, fulfill their obligation and get that loan relief. Next slide, please. So some of our eligibility for providers is that they need to be a permanent employee at a pre-approved site and start seeing patients no later than July 1st of the application year. They also must have and maintain a full Washington license. We have a few identified in the next slide, but they also must provide comprehensive primary care, which is a little different than some healthcare sites have defined. Generally, this is providing care for the whole person on an ongoing basis, not focused or limited to gender, age, organ system, particular illness, or categorical population. But we have more description in our reference guide, which we'll share a link in a bit. But next slide, please. So these are our just some of the provider types. There's another slide of this, but I wanted to highlight that because of the flexibility with our state programs and that they're fully state funded, we have a little bit more leeway in highlighting professions that we want to prioritize and support here in Washington. I do want to note that forensic pathologist, that one in the middle there, is our newest addition. Just this recent cycle, we added that as an eligible profession due to some work in the legislature. But yeah, here the bullet points indicate what programs these professions are eligible for. We have one application. They're all, depending on how they fill out their application, it automatically filters them out for eligibility. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. All right, sweet. And in this one, I want to highlight that our behavioral health professions, those like grayed out stars, those are eligible for the federal program if they have a full license. If they have an associate level license, they're eligible for our state programs. So that's something notable there. And then there's a few licenses that if they're related to the mental health field or specialize in that area, they would be eligible for a behavioral health program. Next slide, please. So this is a list of our eligible sites for our program. We have a full list of currently approved sites on our website, but we also have an application if your employer or if you're an employer and your site isn't on our list. We also have an online application and some more information on a reference guide for eligibility. So if you have any questions, we highly encourage you to reach out to us. We're always looking to make sure we have more sites across the state and work with folks. So yeah, these are just some of the eligible site types, more information on a reference guide when it comes to eligibility. Yeah, next slide, please. I wanted to share a little bit about the demand for our program over the last few years. When it comes to applicants, these are healthcare providers that have shown interest in our program and have applied to receive our student loan relief. This chart starts at 2016. That's the point when our application was modernized and there was an online version available for people to complete. The spike that we see in 2018 was through a concentrated effort to assist people in getting their application through the door, really intentional outreach. And I will note that our application closes in March of every year. So you'll see that in 2020, we had a pretty high peak of 381. That the pandemic hit right after our application closed. And it looks like we're on trajectory to match that level in the this year. Our current cycle is still running, so some information to share there, but it looks like we're on track to reach a new peak of applicants interested in our programs. Next slide, please. And yeah, this slide shares our funding levels for our 3 sub-programs and our nurse educator, which I'll talk about in a bit. Something I wanted to highlight here is that there has been really an interest in funding our behavioral health program, and that investment has resulted in a greater number of awardees for those professions, which I'll show in the next slide. But yeah, this is our funding levels. Our state program has also seen a bump in funding in the next few years, and that will also be reflected in additional awardees in coming years. Next slide, please. And yeah, I wanted to highlight here for this previous cycle are just to highlight that investment in behavioral health licenses and how that has resulted in a greater percentage of applicants being awarded. these are pretty significant. I'll say on average, non-behavioral health licenses were awarded at about a 19%. It ranged from 17 to 34% across other license types. So this concentrated investment has resulted in, yeah, ability to award more folks and provide more student loan relief. Next slide, please. And yeah, I'll talk about our latest program. We just completed the first year of the Nurse Educator Loan Repayment Program. This is specifically for those who are teaching a nursing curriculum at an approved Washington nursing school. It is also a maximum award of $75,000 in student loan relief, and it is a 3 to 5 year contract depending on if they're considered full-time or part-time by their institution, and they must teach at least one class per academic term to remain in good standing within our program. That looks like 3 quarters or 2 semesters, depending on their institution. Next slide, please. And so, like I mentioned, we've only completed one site 2023 award cohort. We had 58 total applicants, and this is the breakdown by institution in this pie chart. We were able to award 44 of the applicants. We were able to award most folks. There was a few that we weren't able to award, but that was because of PSLF kicking in. So if that hadn't been the case, we probably still would have been able to award them as well. It looks like we're on track to also be awarding a lot of folks who applied this year. Next slide, please. And yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, our cycle is annual. Every year we open our application for healthcare providers and the nurse educator program. It's typically the first week in January. So January 2025 is when our next cycle will open, and we typically close in early March. We highly encourage anyone who is interested in applying for our program but isn't currently in an approved site to reach out to us or have their employer complete a pre-approval site application. Those applications are open year-round, but you are able to submit them at any time, but we highly encourage before the application cycle so that our team has a chance to review and get back to you with any questions we might have. And if you have any questions on eligibility, we're always happy to answer those questions as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is what the typical timeline looks like. Our app opens and closes from January through March. We connect with employers to certify the information that applicants have included so that when we go to scoring, we have the most accurate information available for us. And our awarding period runs through June through July with contracts beginning on July 1st of that year. Next slide, please. And yeah, you might have noticed this is primarily for healthcare providers already working in the field. We are currently working on setting up a few projects that are helping support the pipeline into this into the healthcare field. It's a little too early to share more information, but for some interesting things that we have lined up is the Behavioral Health Conditional Scholarship, which currently is looking to aim to support first-year grad students looking to get a licensure in the behavioral health care workforce. We also have a behavioral health stipend launching early next year that is looking to support those who are in behavioral health apprenticeships. And yeah, we would highly encourage you to stay connected with us if you have any questions. Our contact information is on the side. And I'll pass it over to Joel.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Luis, for your knowledge and expertise on Washington Health Corps. This is really an incredible program. I'm excited about the more I learn about it and listen to you and other staff talk about it. We did have a little Q&A in the chat as well as the Q&A function. And so want to just summarize for folks who may not be in the chat, but there was some discussion about how eligible sites are determined and why someone may apply, for example, to the Washington Health Corps through one of the 3 pathways and not get funded. Would you be able to provide just kind of a really high-level overview of how sites are determined and what impacts that? Is it based on legislative funding or other priorities? Just anything maybe briefly that goes into that.
Yeah, so I'll say for that question on why someone might get awarded a different award than what they might have hoped for, was that the question?
Yeah, the question specifically, it was like, why would someone apply for behavioral health, for example, and then they may not get an award?
Yeah, so our funding, we try to allocate as many funds as possible with the funds that we have available. That might look like maybe awarding a state contract rather than a behavioral health contract. But because of the same maximum award amounts, it's likely they would still be eligible for the same amount of student loan relief. Our federal awards are a little bit more competitive. It's a smaller pool of money and some more further restrictions, and it depends on the site that they work at. And so those are a little bit more limited in the ones that we can offer.
Got it.
That
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. We have another question as well, which asks, can a student be in college while they apply, if they have a contract at an employer, like following graduation, and then kind of turning that around, can a person apply for this, loan repayment assistance or scholarship, after being in the workforce for a number of years?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, students can definitely apply during that January through March period, so long as they're able to receive their license by July 1st and start seeing patients by July 1st. So it is possible for someone who is graduating to apply, but not yet be fully licensed or have an eligible license or be working on an approved site. So long as those are lined up, then you should be good. As for the question for those who've already been in the workforce for a long period of time, yeah, this award is for anyone, and I guess I'll clarify that this is a student loan repayment program and not a scholarship. So it's money that's sent directly to the participant to then apply towards their student loan payments. And so it could be someone who's just starting out in the healthcare workforce or someone who's been working there for several years. Although the contract does only count hours going forward after July 1st.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. And then I think our last question for right now, is there any other additional information that you could share about the behavioral health stipend that is being developed?
Yeah, I don't have too much to share, but if you want, maybe if you can send us your contact information and get in touch. Um, yeah, sorry, I don't know if one of my teammates have something more to share.
Yeah, no problem. I think the question was anonymous, but if the person asking, if you'd be willing to reach out to health@wasac.wa.gov, I know we'd be happy to talk more and see what's available. And of course, as we get closer to early 2025, we'll have a lot more to share, I think. So, Luis, I think we'll transition to the next topic and then handle any additional questions at the end. But want to say thank you so much again for sharing your time and expertise. This is a really powerful program, and we are lucky to have folks like you administering it. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. Okay, if we could go to our next slide, please. I'm super excited to introduce our third and final topic of today's webinar, which is duty. I'll turn it over to Amy, our Associate Director of Strategy and Partnerships on this issue. Just an incredible advocate for students, and looking forward to this. So Amy, go ahead when you're ready.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you today to talk about the policy area of students' basic needs security in Washington, which is at heart the radical notion that all students should have stable food, housing, and other fundamental needs met as they're pursuing their post-secondary goals. I'd like to share three things today in the next 15 minutes. So why is this important for post-secondary attainment and what we're learning about it? And some recent state legislative advances. Finally, I'd like to wrap up some priorities on the horizon. Next slide, please. So most states have a state post-secondary attainment goal, but unlike most states, in 2019, the Wasatch Council determined that supports for students' basic needs with a focus on housing, food, childcare, mental health care, and other needs are a core strategy to equitably achieving that attainment goal, as critical as affordability, enrollment, and completion. So Washington also really recognized that these are complex challenges and they require complex solutions works with all players. So addressing students' basic needs can involve higher education, existing public resources, and local and community resources. It's not something that can just be placed, straight on the community only or straight only on higher education. It's a combination and partnership in many cases. And while many partnerships around the state have been working to address students' basic needs for years at the local level, it's really this strategic framework that has kept a focus at the state level to understand and address basic needs and security as part of attainment. I'd like to go on to the next slide. And as I go, I'm going to be sharing in the chat some links to additional resources that I'm just highlighting in the conversation today. So I'd like to start with a core factor underlying students' struggle to meet basic needs. While Washington is rightly famous for its highly equitable state financial aid, something that we have to keep in mind is that the majority of attendance costs for post-secondary are not tuition. So on this slide, you see two pies that represent the total cost of attendance for students. So notice that in each of the pies, the tuition, which is in purple, is only a small part of the total cost of attendance. The rest is all non-tuition expenses or basic needs that a student has to figure out how to cover while they study. Next slide, please. So here's what affordability looks like in Washington for public post-secondary students for the full cost of attendance then. So for students with the lowest income levels who receive both state and Pell federal financial assistance, there is a significant gap in meeting that total cost of attendance. So students at community and technical colleges living at home, that's the graph on the left, have an unmet need that's over $5,000 a year. For those living independently, the unmet need, even for those with a federal and state aid, can be up to $14,000 a year or more. Next slide. Just want to share what this looks like for those students at four-year public institutions. Similarly, the gaps between full state and financial and federal financial aid and the cost of attendance, $14K or more a year. The gaps to cover non-tuition costs of attendance or basic needs are even higher, as you can imagine, for students who aren't able to receive that federal financial aid. And as we all know, inflation and high housing costs are at epic levels and make these costs of attendance really lowball costs. So the gap can be even greater. These gaps are really important to be thinking about as we consider the reasons why so many Washington students are struggling to make ends meet for their basic needs. Next slide, please. So how common is basic needs insecurity among Washington post-secondary students? In fall 2022, Washington fielded a statewide survey in 39 partner campuses assessing basic needs and security in the dimensions of food, housing, security, and homelessness, and some other areas as well. Nearly color, first generation students, and low income students as well. Top line finding on this, students reported experiencing basic needs insecurity in the prior year at very high rates. In fact, 1 in 2 respondents experienced insecurity in food and or housing in the prior year. One surprise was that students both at community and technical colleges and four-year institutions had similar food and housing insecurity rates. We also saw that no region of the state was untouched by basic needs insecurity, according to respondents. It was over 45% in regions across the state. Some student populations were disproportionately facing high basic needs insecurity. Former foster students, parenting students, students of color, and other groups had disproportionately high levels. The big takeaway here, this is not just about a few struggling students, it's a problem across the state. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pause for a second and put in the chat some more information about the findings in the survey that I was describing there. Continuing, the survey also asked about reliable access to healthcare. That was another challenge reported by students. Only half reported reliable access to needed healthcare in the prior 12 months, and only 1 in 3, 34%, said they had reliable access to needed mental behavioral health services. We know that healthcare is fundamental, and mental and behavioral health services can be interrelated with other kinds of basic needs as well. So this is a significant finding as well. Next slide. There are public benefits, community resources, and also campus supports that can help ease basic needs insecurity with students. Yet our 2022 survey findings showed that of those who struggled with basic needs security, less than half of those Washington students reported accessing those resources. We find that in national research as well, and it really relates to some of the policy solutions that Washington has moved forward on, and that I'll describe in the next couple slides. So next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the landscape of state support for post-secondary basic needs. What does it look like in recent years? I would like to do a broad characterization that up until 2023, and this year for implementation, Washington has really had incremental progress with some limited investments and policy changes. And just to highlight a few, I want to note that the Passport to Careers program was expanded in 2019 and 2020 to provide support and scholarships to both former foster care youth and unaccompanied homeless youth. However, funding for this program was cut in half in the 2024 budget. That cuts in half the Passport scholarship to those students that really helps vulnerable populations with basic needs. 2019 legislation established emergency assistant grants to pilots in the CTCs, and by 2021 that became permanent, but only for the community and technical colleges. Fair Start legislation in 2021 for expanding childcare also included increased access to subsidies for CTC students. And big shout out to sponsor Senator Claire Wilson. That has focused on CTC students. We'd like to see that be inclusive of other post-secondary student groups. Finally, I'd just like to highlight with the leadership of Chair Slatter, a budget proviso included bridge grants of $500 annually for low-income Washington students, as well as an expanded range of eligibility for low-income Washington students to receive the full Washington College grant. That's been a wonderful thing. The bridge grant is an interesting strategy because it's flexible funds that can address some basic needs, but as you can imagine, $500 for the year, it goes quickly for students. Next slide, please. So new on the horizon, I'd like to highlight 2 statewide policies for publics with investments that really has had great impact in public institutions to address basic needs. The Supporting Students Experiencing Homelessness legislation, a grant program, which was made permanent in 2023 with lead sponsor Senator Trudeau, and the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act, supporting students' resource navigation and food security. And big shout out to lead sponsor Representative Entenmann. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of those. Next slide. So first, the Supporting Students Experiencing Homelessness program. This is a small grant program to public colleges and universities so that they can identify students facing homelessness and provide case management and referrals to the community, housing support, food assistance, and other supports. It's really dedicated to persistence supports for these students. And it also includes former foster care students. Over the last 4 years, 6,700 students have been served. Even when it started, in 2019, 2020 with only 6 institutions as a beginning. And those students across the 4 years, when it was a pilot, before it became permanent this year, all those students have persisted at high rates. I'll put a little more information about the supporting students experiencing homelessness in the chat for you. Last policy I want to highlight is that in 2023, the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act passed, and it creates infrastructure to address basic needs and security in public colleges. This legislation funds basic needs navigators, who are new staff, a critical support guiding students to access existing resources and benefits. And as required by the legislation, it also requires institutions to develop strategic plans to address basic needs over time. Institutions have been working really hard on their strategic plans and considering how they can advance supports for students in the coming year. Finally, the legislation also requires assessment of basic needs security in this coming fall. Last thing I'll highlight here is that this act also funds innovation. So it funds a pilot of 6 universities and community colleges to develop strategies to proactively support students' food security. These colleges have very different resources, some without even hot food service available on campus. And so they're testing unique approaches and strategies together with their community partners to prevent food insecurity in systems approaches. All right, last slide. We're on the home stretch, everyone. I want to look forward a little bit onto the horizon. How can we be building on these advances in Washington to ensure basic needs and security doesn't undermine students' education? A lot of advocates are thinking about this. Many of you are here today, and I'd like to share some of the priorities emerging with WASAC. So first, WASAC is working with partners around knowledge development. We have to keep better understanding our landscape and specific interventions. So as I mentioned, WASAC and partners will be running a statewide basic needs survey again this fall. This will be the same instrument, second year. And both state and institutional data will be available early in 2025. We're really excited about how these findings can continue to increase awareness and drive policy on state and local levels. Also, WASAC is prioritizing learning more about Washington parenting students, including their access to childcare. We've learned that parenting students have high reported rates of basic needs and security and challenges accessing childcare, but we lack a lot of core information about the student population and the barriers they face. We see opportunity as well to better understand the strategies and impact of the food security pilot I described. So we're very interested in how a strong evaluation could inform policy and investments around food security. On the policy and practice front, I'll just mention 3 priorities emerging. One is addressing the needs of the most vulnerable post-secondary populations, particularly former foster and homeless youth coming into post-secondary. We're very concerned about the passport cut that occurred this year, and we're looking at multiple ways to address those needs. Flexible resources to students to address and prevent basic needs are very important. There's many different ways to do that. We're interested in exploring those and working with partners on that. And finally, just to plug something that is not legislative, it's in the arena of practice. We're working with Department of Social and Health Services and institutions to test data sharing innovations to target outreach to students. We know that there are students likely eligible because they're receiving state aid, but they're not currently receiving student benefits. This will be a pilot project in the new year, and we're excited to learn and share with everyone what we are finding from that. That wraps it up. I want to say thanks for the time and the opportunity today to talk about students' basic needs. We're excited to engage with you on these ideas and more as we go forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Amy. We do have a couple questions to grapple with here, and actually kind of aligned with what I was hoping to ask too. So yeah, I first again want to say thank you to you for your time. For everyone still with us, Amy has like just been a really long time steward of this work at WASAC and just a really, really critical and important advocate. So we deeply appreciate all that you do, Amy. The two questions we've gotten so far about student basic needs. The first is just about the survey. Is the survey happening for 2024 going to be following the same process as the previous one in fall 2022?
Great question. We have a few innovations in the survey that will make it easier for institutions to participate. So participation is required in the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act for all public institutions, but we are working together with our partners, shout out to Western Washington University, who will be administering the survey in a centralized way. That means that institutions will not have to field the survey themselves. We will have centralized administration that will make it easier for everyone. The instrument itself will be the same with a few streamlining fewer questions because we're pursuing this centralized approach. So we expect that the survey will be easier for institutions and produce better quality data because it'll be connected with enrollment data through the centralized process. And happy to answer any additional questions following up to about the survey.
Perfect. Another question, and we'll get a few more. Sorry, there's one more about the survey. I'll just skip to right now. Has planning already started for the survey? Like, when will it be launched? Like, are there any other logistical details that you could share?
Absolutely. The planning is happening now. And we're working closely in the CTCs with the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges who will partner with us on that centralized administration. We're also working with the all the kind of commissions and councils of the State Board through the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges. We have met with the institutional researchers of the public baccalaureates and are working together with the Council of Presidents, our good partners, to also plan and take in a lot of the feedback and engagement with the public baccalaureates. So yes, it is underway. And if anyone would like to engage with me on this, please hit me up. I'd love to talk with you about it. More details.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. We have two other questions, it looks like, for this section. The first is that if you are an external organization or stakeholder who is hoping to connect with the students experience or supporting students experiencing homelessness program, how would someone go about that? Because it sounds like there is some interest in potentially connecting maybe with navigators or staff who support students in that program in different parts of the state.
Wonderful. I would be delighted to help connect anyone here with different programs at different institutions, or more broadly with regional or state level connections we have with those programs. So definitely reach out to me and I'd be happy to direct you to the institutions that you'd like to partner with. It is the community partnerships that are so essential in this work because really, institutions in the Supporting Students Experiencing Homelessness program are receiving very little money in their grants. It's really gap filling money. And the primary approach is to help connect students to existing resources, especially in the community and public benefits.
Okay, awesome. The other question that we had was about basic needs hubs in college campuses. We know that those can be a really important resource to kind of centralize opportunities and supports for students, but could you talk a little bit more about what sort of role those hubs may play in allowing students to access maybe non-educational resources. So things like SNAP or nutrition assistance or childcare support or other things that support student basic needs security.
Absolutely. So every public institution, because of the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act, has been onboarding and training and getting rolling their basic needs navigation. So every institution now has a real person, maybe more than one in some cases, to outreach to students and to engage and connect them with public benefits, community and campus resources. So that exists in some colleges and universities. They have decided to centralize all non-academic and basic needs related services and staff in a kind of hub structure, a single centralized location on campus. That was a model that was well developed with the United Way of King County as a partner in the King County Community and Technical Colleges, and shout out to United Way of King County for being such an important guide, as well as technical assistance for institutions outside of King County that have worked to develop a hub. It is not a requirement in the Post-Secondary Basic Needs Act, but it has been a strong practice that many institutions now are working to create. It often is a multi-year process to develop a centralized hub on a campus, because it involves space, it involves staffing, it involves, funding. So it's an excellent way to proceed, but it's not across all publics yet. Sometimes it's a journey. So thanks for that question.
Okay, great. We have one more, but I'm going to ask if we could transition to our last slide. That would be great. I know we have some Q&A time bookmarked at the end of this call, and I think we'll finish a little bit early this afternoon. But we did have one other question, and Amy, I think it's probably most relevant to the student supports work. Attendee has mentioned, a new bill that was passed this legislative session to link the Washington College grant to SNAP. And for those who are interested, I will put a link in the chat to more information about this and can describe it in just a second. But just, given that work that's being done at the state level, from your perspective and working in student supports and student basic needs, do you feel like there are other opportunities to kind of connect or streamline access to public assistance programs and then maybe other forms of assistance for students?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Bryce. I think that there are opportunities. We see that in many cases, there might be ways to do that administratively. And so we're kind of exploring those opportunities. We would love to be able to connect with other agencies on how we could develop categorical eligibility or similar, so that similar to our SNAP Washington College grant policy work this last legislative session, we could have that kind of categorical eligibility for Washington College grant, but the reverse also. Are there ways that we could promote students to have a streamlined access to Medicaid, to working families tax credit? These are all areas for exploration. We're in the early stages, I think, of that, but I think it's an exciting direction to be working in. And I have to say, have been so pleased with the opportunities with the Economic Justice Alliance in Washington, which has been looking at ways to connect agencies and find those ways to streamline eligibility across programs. So we're very eager to partner on that.
Awesome. Well, again, Amy, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise today. This has been wonderful and we really appreciate it. Okay, great. So you may have seen, for those of us who are still with us, or those of you who are still with us, thank you so much for joining us today. We are kind of toward the end of our webinar, but just wanted to leave you all with a few notes. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to be hosting stakeholder engagement sessions in early July. So Tuesday, July 9th from 1 to 3, and then Thursday, July 11th from 10 to 12. These will both be on Zoom to ensure that folks across the state can attend and provide feedback on some of the ideas that we're considering ahead of the 2025 legislative session. And registration links to those calls will be sent out in the follow-up materials to this call. So wanted to leave that there. I will also put them in the chat. But in the meantime, we just wanted to do kind of a brief touch base as folks leave the call today. If anyone who's with us would be willing to share in the chat, just what is your biggest takeaway today, whether it's OtterBot, the Health Corps, data on student basic needs security. We would just love to know what is kind of sticking with you and what is something you're going to share with your colleagues and your networks after leaving today. And then the second question is, what sorts of programs, policies, or topics would you like to see featured in this sort of setting in the future? We are hoping to host this webinar again in future springs to come and have more engagement throughout the year. And so if there are programs that WASAC administers or other policies we're working on that you'd love to know more about in a setting like this, we'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to add your answers in the chat. And I will add links to our summer stakeholder engagement sessions as well. A last thing today I'll just share is that if you have any questions about the content covered today, I know we've shared some contact information throughout, but both myself as well as my supervisor, our Director of External Affairs, Heather Hudson, we are more than happy to answer questions, to engage with you, to connect you to Amy and Luis and Sarah and Casey and all of our wonderful presenters today to better understand the work that WASAC has going on and hopefully partner with you all in the future on really exciting and innovative proposals. So with that being said, I want to say thank you for coming. Again, if you'd like to, please feel free to share your takeaways and thoughts in the chat. And with that, we'll hold the call open for another couple minutes here. But just want to say thank you so much for coming. It's been an honor to present with you all, and we look forward to engaging later this year. So thanks so much, everyone.